The captured prey. Thyra's heart pounded like a drum in her chest. Cold metal cuffs dug into her wrists as two towering human soldiers dragged her down a dark, narrow hallway. The air smelled strange, like metal, fire, and something she couldn't name. Every step echoed against the smooth walls, making her feel even smaller. She had heard the stories. Humans were monsters, flesh-eaters, destroyers of worlds. When the war between the Valari and the Terran Union began, the elders warned everyone, if the humans catch you, you will never return. Not because they would keep you as a prisoner, because they would eat you. Zyra swallowed hard, fear crawling up her throat like a living thing. She had seen it with her own eyes. Entire Valari outposts wiped out in days. Cities turned to ruins. And now she was the last survivor of her squad, dragged into the belly of a human warship. Her fate was sealed. The soldiers stopped in front of a thick metal door. One of them pressed a button on the side panel. The door hissed open. Without a word, they shoved her inside and left, the door slamming shut behind her. Zyra stumbled forward, catching herself just in time. The room was dimly lit, cold, and empty, except for one thing. A human. He sat at a metal table, hands folded, watching her. He wasn't wearing armor like the others. Instead, he wore a dark uniform with a patch on his sleeve that she couldn't read. His eyes were sharp, calculating. A predator sizing up his meal. Zyra forced herself to stand tall, even though her legs trembled. She wouldn't beg. If she was going to die, she would face it with dignity. The human sighed and leaned back in his chair. You can sit, you know. Zyra flinched at the sound of his voice. It was deep, steady, nothing like the snarling roars she had imagined. She glared at him. I'd rather stand. He tilted his head, studying her. Then, without breaking eye contact, he reached into a small metal box on the table and pulled something out. Zyra's breath caught in her throat. It was a knife. Her instincts screamed. She braced herself, waiting for the attack. But the human didn't move toward her. Instead, he turned the knife and pressed it against his own finger. A thin line of blood appeared. Zyra's eyes widened in shock. What was he doing? The human wiped the blood away with his thumb. Then he set the knife down. See, he said, I bleed, just like you. Zyra stared at him, unsure what to say. Was this some kind of game? A trick? The human leaned forward. My name is Commander Elias Carter. You're aboard the UTS Valkyrie. And before you say anything stupid, no, we're not going to eat you. Zyra's body stiffened. He knew. He knew what she was thinking. Her voice was dry, weak. Lies. Elias sighed again. He opened another small metal box and pulled out something round and smooth. A fruit. She watched as he took a bite, chewed, and swallowed. We eat food, he said, waving the fruit in the air. Not people. Zyra's stomach twisted. She wanted to believe him. But how could she? The Valari elders spoke of human deception. They would lull you into false security, then strike when you least expect it. Elias must have seen the doubt in her eyes because he shrugged. If we ate aliens, don't you think we'd be a little fatter? Zyra didn't answer. She wasn't ready to lower her guard. Elias pushed the fruit toward her. Eat. She shook her head. Poison. He rolled his eyes. It's an apple. Do you think we waste time poisoning food? Zyra clenched her fists. She was starving, but she refused to trust him. Elias watched her for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. Suit yourself, but if you're expecting torture or death, you'll be waiting a long time. We don't do that. Zyra's breath was shaky. Why was he talking like this? Why wasn't he attacking her? Why wasn't he acting like a monster? Before she could ask, the door opened again. A different human walked in, this one a woman, carrying a tray. She placed it on the table. The smell hit Zyra instantly. Food. Real food. A steaming plate of vegetables, soft bread, a bowl of clean water. Zyra's stomach twisted again. Elias motioned to the tray. "You're a prisoner, but you're not our enemy. Eat." She looked at the food, then at Elias. Was this another trick? Was this part of some cruel game? Or was everything she believed about humans wrong? Zyra didn't move, didn't speak. Her heart pounded, but this time, not just with fear, with confusion. And for the first time since her capture, a sliver of doubt, fear, and confusion. Zyra did not move. The food sat in front of her, steam curling into the air, carrying scents that made her stomach twist in agony. Hunger clawed at her insides like a starving beast, but she refused to touch it. This was a trick. It had to be. She had spent her whole life fearing humans. No, not just fearing them, despising them. The stories told by the Velari elders painted them as merciless creatures, predators that devoured anything weaker than them. Now one of them sat across from her, eating fruit, offering her food, acting as if she were a guest. Zyra tightened her jaw, her eyes flicking between the human male, Elias, and the food in front of her. "Not hungry?" Elias asked, raising an eyebrow. Zyra ignored him. If she spoke, she might break. If she broke, she might eat. And if she ate, she might start to believe him. The woman who had brought the food, another human, sighed. She's going to starve herself if she keeps this up. Elias rubbed his temples. Yeah, I figured. He turned his gaze back to Zyra. Look, we don't force-feed prisoners. But you need to eat eventually. Zyra swallowed, keeping her face expressionless. Why do you care? Elias leaned back in his chair thinking. I don't know. Maybe because starving people to death isn't something humans do. She scoffed. Lies. Your kind destroys everything in its path. You devour. You conquer. You consume. Elias's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed and leaned forward, placing his elbows on the table. Let me ask you something, he said. How many humans have you actually met? Zyra hesitated. Not the stories you've heard, Elias continued, his voice calm but firm. Not the warnings from your elders. How many humans have you personally seen? Spoken to? She clenched her fists. I saw your armies destroy our colonies. I saw human warships burn our cities. Elias nodded. Yeah. And I saw your people ambush our supply convoys. I saw Velari warships bomb civilian outposts. Zyra's breath caught in her throat. That's different. We were defending ourselves from human aggression. Elias gave a bitter laugh. You think this war started because we just decided to attack you one day. Zyra opened her mouth but found no words. War is ugly, Elias said, his voice softer now. And yes, humans fight. We kill when we have to. But eating prisoners? He shook his head. That's not who we are. Zyra felt something crack inside her. A tiny, dangerous crack in the beliefs she had held her entire life. The silence stretched between them. Then, Elias stood up. Fine. You don't want to eat. Suit yourself. He grabbed the tray and walked toward the door. Zyra's body acted before her mind could stop it. Wait. Elias paused. Her stomach clenched, her pride warring with her need for survival. Her voice came out softer than she wanted. Leave the food. Elias turned, studying her face. A moment later, he set the tray back down. All right, he said, but don't expect a 5-star meal every day. Zyra didn't respond. She kept her eyes locked on the food, even as Elias and the other human left the room, sealing the door behind them. For a long time, she didn't move. Finally, slowly, her shaking fingers reached for a piece of bread. She sniffed it. No strange sense. No hidden poison. Her stomach twisted again. What if this was a test? What if they were watching her? What if the moment she ate, they would mock her for being weak? But the hunger was stronger than the fear. She took a bite. The moment the soft, warm bread touched her tongue, her body betrayed her. She tore into the meal, hands shaking, stuffing food into her mouth like a starving animal. Every bite was agony and relief at the same time. It was real food. Not poisoned. Not drugged. Just food. For the first time since she had been captured, Syra felt something strange. Confusion. She had expected torture. She had expected hunger, pain, maybe even death. But kindness? No. That was impossible. Later, she sat against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the empty plate. Her body felt warm now, her stomach full for the first time in days. But her mind was racing. Everything she had believed about humans was wrong. She had seen their soldiers protect their wounded. She had seen them share their supplies with each other. And now one had fed her. What did it mean? The sound of the door opening made her head snap up. Elias was back. He walked in casually, carrying a small datapad. He pulled up a chair and sat down, looking at her. "So," he said, "you still think we eat people?" Syra scowled. "I don't know what to think anymore." Elias smirked. "Good. That means you're starting to think for yourself instead of believing everything your leaders told you." She glared at him, but deep down, she knew he was right. The walls around her mind were starting to crack. And that terrified her more than anything. The other side of humanity. Syra could not sleep. She sat in the corner of her cold, metal-walled cell, her back pressed against the hard surface, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. The food had settled in her stomach, yet her mind refused to rest. Everything about this situation felt wrong. Where was the torture? The punishment? The twisted, sadistic glee she had always imagined humans would show toward their prisoners. Instead, they had given her food, a place to sleep. They spoke to her as if she were. No, she couldn't think like that. These were humans, monsters. They were deceivers, manipulators. She had to remember that. And yet, every time she tried to force herself to believe it, an unsettling thought wormed its way into her mind. What if everything she had been told was a lie? The next day, the door opened again. Elias Carter stepped in, carrying a small bundle of fabric under one arm and a tray of food in the other. Syra remained silent, watching as he set the tray on the table. The meal was simple: more bread, some cooked protein, a bowl of something that smelled faintly sweet. Without looking at her, he tossed the bundle onto the empty chair across from her. "Here," he said. "You need a change of clothes." Syra frowned. Her prison suit was torn and stiff with dried sweat. She had barely noticed before, but now the offer of clean clothes felt strange. Another trick. She hesitated, staring at the fabric as if it would suddenly turn into a weapon. "Why are you giving me this?" Elias gave her a tired look. "Because you stink." Syra's mouth fell open slightly. Did he just? She scowled. "I do not stink." Elias shrugged. "You've been locked up for days without a bath. Trust me, you stink." Syra's face burned with indignation, but when she glanced down at her uniform, she had to admit, it was disgusting. She huffed, grabbed the bundle, and held it against her chest. "I don't need human charity." Elias smirked. "It's not charity. It's called basic hygiene. You can either change, or you can keep wearing that filth. Your choice." Syra gritted her teeth. She hated him. She hated how casual he was about all of this. She hated that he wasn't cruel. She hated that he didn't treat her like some worthless insect. Most of all, she hated that, deep down, she was starting to listen to him. A look at humanity. She was given permission to leave her cell. Not unsupervised, of course. 2 guards always followed her, their weapons strapped to their sides. But she was allowed to move within certain areas of the ship. And that's when she saw it. Humans weren't just soldiers. They laughed, they argued, they helped each other. She passed by a medical bay, and saw a human doctor, a healer, not a killer, patching up an injured soldier. He spoke to his patient with warmth, as if they were close friends. She saw engineers working together, covered in grease, laughing and teasing one another. She watched two humans in the mess hall sharing a meal, one stealing food off the other's plate, and the other swatting his hand away with mock annoyance. It was all so normal. They weren't monsters. They weren't bloodthirsty creatures who only lived for war. They were people. She stopped in the middle of the hallway, gripping the sleeves of her new clean uniform. She hated how comfortable it felt. She hated that she had expected to be treated like an animal. And instead, she was treated like a person. Her entire life had been spent preparing for war against humans, but no one had ever told her what they were like when they weren't fighting. And now that she had seen it, she couldn't unsee it. Everything okay? Elias had stopped a few feet ahead, noticing her hesitation. Zyra looked at him, struggling to find words. "I don't understand you," she admitted. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what part?" She swallowed. "Why are you so kind?" Elias sighed, crossing his arms. "You keep saying that like it's something unusual." "It is unusual," she insisted. "My people taught me that humans kill without remorse. That you take, you conquer, you destroy." Elias didn't flinch. He simply shook his head, a sad expression crossing his face. "You were lied to," he said simply. Zyra felt something twist deep in her chest. She wanted to argue. She wanted to believe that humans were as monstrous as she had always thought. But she couldn't. Because for the first time, she was starting to see the truth for herself. The breaking point. That night, she overheard something that shattered everything. She was in her cell, lying awake, when she heard voices outside her door. Her own people abandoned her. Zyra's blood ran cold. She recognized Elias's voice. The other belonged to someone she didn't know. "They told us she was expendable," the second voice said. "They cut a deal with High Command, gave us information in exchange for their own safety. They knew we would take her prisoner, and they didn't care." Zyra couldn't breathe. No, that wasn't possible. Her people had given her up. They had let her be captured, offered her as a sacrifice, just to save themselves. The voices faded as the two humans walked away, leaving Zyra alone with her thoughts, her hands clenched into fists. She had feared humans all her life. She had believed them to be her worst enemy. But now, she realized something even more painful. The real enemy was her own kind, a truth more terrifying. Zyra sat in the darkness of her cell, her mind spiraling into chaos. She had spent her life believing that humans were the enemy. But now, she had learned something far worse. Her own people had abandoned her. Her own leaders had sacrificed her to save themselves. The words echoed in her mind over and over. They knew we would take her prisoner, and they didn't care. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the cold metal floor. It felt as though something inside her had cracked open, like a dam struggling to hold back an unstoppable flood. Everything she had fought for, everything she had believed in, it was all a lie. Her people, the Valeri High Council, had told them to never surrender. That honor was more important than life. That loyalty was unbreakable. And yet, when the humans had captured her, the Council had given her up without hesitation. Like she was nothing, her hands clenched into fists. She had trained for years, risking everything for a war she had thought was righteous. She had been willing to die for her people. But her people had not been willing to do the same for her. She sucked in a shaky breath. What do I do now? The choice she never expected. The next morning, Elias returned. Zyra didn't speak when he entered. She simply sat on the floor, her expression unreadable. Elias didn't comment on it. Instead, he tossed something toward her, a small rectangular device, a datapad. "You should see this," he said. Zyra hesitated, then slowly picked it up. The screen flickered to life. Her stomach turned as she saw the image of her own people. A Velari ambassador was standing in a human war room, surrounded by officers. Thyra's fingers trembled as she read the official statement at the bottom of the screen. The Velari High Council acknowledges that the captured soldier is not essential to our operations. We do not claim responsibility for her actions, nor do we recognize her as an official representative of our forces. Zara felt like she had been punched in the gut. Not essential. Not a representative. They had erased her. She looked up at Elias, her breathing uneven. You recorded this. Elias shook his head. No, it was broadcasted. Publicly. To our people. To yours. Zyra's vision blurred. They had thrown her away. Publicly. She wanted to scream. She wanted to demand answers. She wanted to deny what she was seeing. But she couldn't. Because it was all right there, in front of her. You were never supposed to know. Elias said. His voice wasn't mocking. It wasn't cruel. It was just sad. Your people assumed you'd be dead before you found out. Zyra swallowed the burning lump in her throat. All those years of loyalty. All those years of training, of fighting, of believing. And for what? For them to abandon her the first chance they got. She stared at the screen, her grip tightening on the datapad. She thought of her squad, her fellow soldiers. Had they known? Had they all been expendable from the start? Had they all been lies? She set the device down slowly, her hands shaking. What do you want from me? Elias studied her for a long moment. Then he exhaled and leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Nothing, he said. Zyra blinked. Nothing. That's right. Elias shrugged. You're not a prisoner anymore. Not really. Zyra's heart pounded. What does that mean? It means the council already disowned you. Elias said. We're not holding you hostage anymore. We're not negotiating with your people. They don't want you back. She swallowed hard. So what happens now? Elias pushed himself off the wall and walked toward the door. You tell me, he said. The door slid open. Zyra stared at it. It was no longer locked. A strange, heavy silence filled the room. You're free to leave, Elias said, glancing back at her. If you want, I'll have my crew drop you off at the next neutral outpost. You'll be on your own, but you won't be a prisoner anymore. She felt her breath hitch. Freedom. But what did freedom mean when she had nowhere to go? The war she never saw. Zyra didn't leave right away. She told herself she was thinking. But in truth, she was watching. And what she saw made her question everything even more. She had spent years being told that humans were destroyers, that they wiped out entire civilizations, that they showed no mercy. But here, aboard this warship, she saw something else. She saw human medics treating wounded alien prisoners, even those from species who had tried to kill them. She saw engineers working tirelessly to repair damaged systems, not just for their human comrades, but for the alien refugees they had rescued. She saw human officers arguing, not about who to kill next, but about how to protect the civilians caught in the war. She saw kindness. She saw humanity. And for the first time, she wondered, had she been fighting the wrong enemy all along? The crossroads. Elias found her sitting in the ship's observation deck, staring out into the vastness of space. He leaned against the railing beside her. So, he said, have you made up your mind? Zyra exhaled slowly. I don't know who I am anymore, she admitted. Elias didn't speak right away. He just watched the distant stars, his expression thoughtful. That's the thing about realizing the truth, he finally said. It wrecks everything you thought you knew. Zyra swallowed. And what am I supposed to do now? Elias glanced at her. That's up to you. A long silence passed. Zyra stared down at her hands, remembering all the things she had believed about humans, all the things she had been told, and all the lies that had crumbled before her eyes. She knew, deep down, that she could never go back. Her people had abandoned her. Her people had lied to her. And now, The only question left was, what would she do about it? The choice. Syra stood at the edge of a decision that would change everything. For the first time since her capture, she was truly free. Free to walk away, free to make her own path. But where would she go? The Valeri had abandoned her. The humans had given her food, safety, and even an option, something her own people had never done. Yet deep inside, doubt still clung to her like a disease. Was this another trick? A long, drawn-out deception? She had spent years seeing humans as the ultimate enemy. Could she really trust them now? The offer she never expected. Elias found her again later that day, in the ship's engineering bay. She had taken to wandering the ship, observing. The humans had stopped treating her like a prisoner, yet they didn't fully welcome her either. She didn't blame them. She was still the enemy. But then Elias surprised her. "You've been thinking," he said, leaning against a metal railing. "I can tell." Syra glanced at him but said nothing. He smirked. "I have a proposal." She tensed. "A proposal?" Elias folded his arms. "Join us." Breath hitched. "Join? You?" "That's right," Elias said. "I've seen what you can do. You're trained. You're smart. And you've got more reason than anyone to fight against the people who threw you away." Syra felt her heart pound. Fight against my own people. She had spent her life fighting for them. She had believed in their cause, in their war, in their honor. But now she knew the truth. The Valeri High Council had abandoned her, lied to her, used her as a pawn. Did she really owe them anything anymore? She met Elias's gaze. "You trust me that much?" Elias shrugged. "I trust what I see. And what I see is someone at a crossroads." Syra exhaled, gripping the metal railing beside her. What was she supposed to do? She had no home, no people. All she had left were choices. And the choice Elias had just offered her was the one she never expected. A warship approaches. Before Syra could answer, an alarm blared across the ship. The entire room shook as the sound of distant explosions rumbled through the hull. Elias's face darkened. "We're under attack." Syra's blood ran cold. "Who?" A voice crackled over the ship's comms. "Incoming warship. Valeri insignia confirmed." Syra froze. Her people were here. For a moment, a spark of hope bloomed in her chest. Had they come to rescue her? Had they realized their mistake? Then the next message shattered that hope. "They've locked weapons on us. Shields at 60% and dropping." Syra felt like the air had been sucked from her lungs. They weren't here for her. They were here to kill her. The ultimate betrayal. The realization hit her like a blade to the chest. The Valeri Council didn't just disown her. They wanted to erase her. They couldn't let her live. If she spoke the truth, if she told other Valeri soldiers what she had learned, it would expose their lies. So they had chosen the easiest solution. They would kill her and every human on this ship, just to keep their power intact. Syra felt something in her shatter. Her fingers curled into fists. Her vision blurred with rage, pain, and something deeper. Valeri warship closing distance. Boarding craft deployed. They were coming. Elias turned to her, his expression sharp but calm. "Looks like you're out of time, Syra." Syra's pulse pounded in her ears. She had a choice. She could run, hide, let the humans fight and pretend she wasn't involved. Or she could fight. Not for the Valeri, not for revenge, but for herself. For the first time, she saw the truth with perfect clarity. The humans were not her enemy. Her own people were. Syra looked Elias in the eyes. And this time, she didn't hesitate. "What do I need to do?" Elias grinned. "That's more like it." The battle begins. Syra followed Elias through the corridors, her mind racing as red emergency lights flashed overhead. She had trained for war her entire life. But this was different. This time, she wasn't fighting for the Valeri. She was fighting against them. The ship shook again as another blast rocked the hull. Zyra's heart pounded as they reached the armory. Elias tossed her a sleek black rifle. "Hope you know how to use this." Sarah caught it effortlessly. The weapon felt different from the one she had trained with, but her hands instinctively knew how to hold it. She checked the power core. Fully charged. Elias smirked. "You sure you're ready for this?" Sarah exhaled sharply. "I've never been more ready in my life." The doors to the hangar opened, and the Velari boarding party stormed in. The first shot. The moment the first enemy soldier stepped through the breach, Kyra moved. Her rifle fired in a clean, perfect burst. One shot, one kill. The Velari soldier crumpled to the ground, shocked eyes staring at her. Her own kind. Her own people. And yet, she felt nothing. Because they weren't her people anymore. More enemies poured in. Zyra and the humans fought as one. Shots rang out. Explosions shook the hangar. The smell of burning metal filled the air. The battle was fierce, brutal, but Sarah felt alive. She wasn't just fighting for survival. She was fighting for her own future. And for the first time, she knew exactly where she belonged. The battle and the revelation. Sarah had trained for war her entire life, but nothing had prepared her for this. The hangar was a war zone. The moment the Velari boarding craft breached the hull, the battle erupted in chaos and fire. The ship's alarm screamed. Sparks flew as blaster fire shredded through metal walls. The air smelled of burning circuits and ionized energy. Zyra's pulse pounded as she moved like a shadow between the cover of cargo crates, her rifle hot in her hands. A Velari soldier spotted her, his eyes filled with recognition. For a split second, he hesitated. "Zyra, what are you?" She pulled the trigger. The shot struck him square in the chest, and he crumpled. Zyra didn't stop. She couldn't stop. These weren't her people anymore. They had come to erase her, just as they had erased her existence from their records. Now, she would erase them first. Fighting for survival. Elias and his crew fought with ruthless efficiency, but the Velari outnumbered them. Zyra could hear the humans shouting orders, taking cover, providing suppressing fire. They fought together, as a team, as a unit. The Velari, however, fought with the cold, detached precision she knew too well. No trust, no teamwork, just orders, just obedience. That was their weakness, and for the first time, Zyra saw it clearly. A group of Velari soldiers had taken cover near the breached airlock. If they pushed forward, the humans would be forced to retreat deeper into the ship, losing control of the hangar. Zyra's heart pounded. She had to stop them. She moved fast, her body acting before her mind could catch up. Ducking under a hail of plasma fire, she sprinted across the open floor, sliding into cover near a fuel console. She pulled a grenade from the belt of a fallen human soldier. A deep breath. No hesitation. She yanked the pin and threw it. The explosion ripped through the Velari ranks, sending bodies flying. A moment later, human soldiers surged forward, taking the opening she had created. "Nice work, traitor," a voice sneered. Zyra spun around just in time to dodge a blade aimed at her throat. She barely had time to react as Commander Valak, her former superior officer, lunged at her. A battle of the past and future. Valak had always been a towering force, his body trained for war. He wielded a plasma dagger, its edge glowing with deadly energy. "Of all the things I expected, Zyra," he snarled, circling her, "I never thought you'd be a filthy human pet." Zyra gripped her rifle tightly, her breath steady. "You abandoned me," she spat. "You abandoned all of us. The Council sold us out." Valak sneered. "And you believe the humans. They lie. They manipulate." Zyra's grip tightened. "Then why did the Council erase my name? Why did they say I was expendable?" Valak hesitated. It was small, just a flicker of hesitation. But Sarah saw it. "You knew," she whispered. His expression darkened. It doesn't matter. You should have died. Now, I'll fix that mistake." He lunged. Zyra dodged, barely avoiding the plasma blade as it sliced through the air. She rolled and fired her rifle. Once, twice. But Valak was too fast. He closed the distance, knocking the rifle from her hands. Zyra reacted instinctively, drawing a small combat knife from her belt. Valak came at her again, swinging his plasma dagger in a brutal arc. She blocked, the force of the blow rattling her bones. For a moment, it was just the two of them. No humans, no war, no sides, just Velari against Velari. Breaking the chains, Zyra fought with everything she had. Every move, every strike. It was all instinct, all training drilled into her since childhood. But this time, something was different. This time, she wasn't fighting for the Velari. She was fighting for herself. Valak lunged again. She caught his wrist, twisted hard, and with a brutal final movement, she drove her blade deep into his chest. Valak's eyes widened in shock. He gasped, staggered, and collapsed to his knees. Zyra knelt beside him, breathing hard. "You betrayed your own kind," he rasped, blood trickling from his lips. Zyra's jaw clenched. "No, you betrayed me first." Valak exhaled a shuddering breath, then went still. Zyra slowly rose to her feet. The battle wasn't over, but in that moment, she felt something break inside her. The last chain tying her to the Velari was gone. Turning the tide, the humans had pushed the Velari back. The hangar was nearly secured. Zyra grabbed her rifle and ran toward Elias, who was firing from behind a barricade. "Your people are pulling back," he shouted over the chaos. They didn't expect resistance. Zyra's gaze snapped toward the enemy warship docked outside the hangar. "They won't retreat without a fight," she warned. "They'll bomb the entire ship if they have to." Elias gritted his teeth. "Then we'd better make sure that doesn't happen." Zyra nodded. She had made her choice. Now she was going to finish it. The final push. Zyra and Elias fought side by side, moving toward the breached airlock where the remaining Velari soldiers were retreating. A few enemies held their ground, but Zyra knew their tactics. She moved like a ghost, anticipating their maneuvers before they even made them. With pinpoint precision, she fired the last shots needed to push them back for good. The remaining soldiers scrambled to retreat, disappearing into their docking craft. Seconds later, the enemy ship's engines flared, and they fled. A tense silence followed. Then, the alarms finally stopped. The battle was over, and Zyra had won. Not just against the Velari, but against everything they had ever made her believe. A new future. As the hangar settled into silence, Zyra turned to Elias. She expected him to say something smug, maybe a sarcastic remark about how she fought better than his own soldiers. But instead, he just looked at her with something else in his eyes. Respect. "You didn't have to stay," he said. Zyra exhaled. "I know." A long pause. Then Elias extended his hand. "What now?" he asked. Zyra glanced at his hand, then at the empty space where the Velari warship had disappeared. Her past was gone. Her future was hers to decide. She reached out and shook his hand. "Now," she said, "I learned what it means to be human." A new future. The battle was over. Smoke still lingered in the air, curling from the wreckage left behind in the hangar. The sharp scent of burnt metal and plasma filled Zyra's lungs as she took slow, measured breaths. She had fought against her own people. She had killed for the humans. And now she had no home to return to. But for the first time, that didn't scare her. Because for the first time, she had chosen her own path. After the battle, the humans moved quickly. The wounded were carried to medical bays, weapons were gathered, and the ship's systems were checked for damage. Zyra watched it all in silence. She was still covered in sweat and grime, her uniform scorched in places, her hands stained with the remnants of battle. Yet, No one looked at her with hatred. Some still looked at her with caution, but others, respect. They had seen her fight. They had seen her make her choice. And that choice had saved them. Not bad, traitor. Zaira turned to see Lieutenant Rourke, one of Elias's senior officers. He was a grizzled human with a scar running down his cheek, his uniform slightly torn from the fight. She tensed at the word traitor, but the way he said it, it wasn't an insult. It was almost like a joke. Before she could respond, he clapped her on the shoulder with surprising force. If you fight like that all the time, we might just keep you around. Zaira blinked, caught off guard. Was that acceptance? She glanced around. Other humans were watching her. Some nodded. Some simply moved on. She wasn't an enemy anymore. She wasn't one of them yet. But she wasn't alone either. A decision to make. Elias found her later in the ship's command deck, where she stood near the main viewing window, staring at the endless void of space. She heard his footsteps behind her. You okay? Zaira exhaled. I don't know. Elias leaned against the railing beside her. That's fair. A long silence stretched between them. The stars outside blinked, distant and unreachable. Do you regret it? He finally asked. Zaira thought about it. Did she regret turning her back on the Velari? On her people? No, because they had never been her people. But the weight of her choice still sat heavy on her chest. My entire life, she said quietly, I was taught that humans were the enemy. That you were ruthless, cruel, monsters. Elias didn't interrupt. He let her speak. And now? He asked. Zaira turned to him. Now, I don't know what to believe anymore. Elias studied her for a moment, then nodded. That's how it starts. She raised an eyebrow. How it starts. He smiled slightly. Thinking for yourself. Zaira exhaled a sharp breath. It's exhausting. Elias chuckled. Yeah. But it beats being a mindless soldier, doesn't it? She couldn't argue with that. A future with no chains. Later that day, Elias gathered the senior crew in the briefing room. I'd like her to decide, not sure if she belonged in this meeting. But Elias made it clear. You're part of this now, he told her before the meeting started. She didn't know what to say to that. As the discussion began, the topic quickly shifted to her. So, what do we do with her? Lieutenant Rourke asked, arms crossed. Zaira straightened. I can leave, she said, if that's what you want. Elias shook his head. That's not what I asked. Rourke studied her for a moment before sighing. Look, I'm not gonna pretend I trust her completely. She fought against us not too long ago. Zaira felt a flicker of frustration. She had risked everything to prove herself. But still, they hesitated. She couldn't blame them. But Elias just smirked. And yet she saved all our asses back there. The room fell silent. Rourke exhaled. Fair point. Elias turned to Zaira. What do you want? The question startled her, because no one had ever asked her that before. She had always been told what to do. She had been given orders, expectations, rules. But now, she could choose. Zaira swallowed hard. I want to stay, she admitted. The words felt foreign on her tongue, but also right. I don't have a home anymore, she continued. I don't know where I belong. But I know what I don't want. She met Elias's gaze. I don't want to fight for lies anymore. A long silence. Then Elias grinned. Well then, he said, welcome to the crew. The first step into humanity. It wasn't instant. It wasn't easy. Some humans were still wary of her. Some refused to speak to her at all. But some did. They taught her things she had never learned in the Velari military. How to joke, how to relax, how to trust. She learned the names of the people around her. She learned how to help in repairs, how to understand human technology, how to work as a team instead of just following orders. And slowly, she began to change. One evening, she found herself in the mess hall, sitting at a table with some human soldiers. One of them nudged her plate. "You gonna eat that?" Zira narrowed her eyes. "Yes." The soldier grinned and stole a piece of her bread anyway. Her first instinct was aggression. Velari soldiers didn't steal from each other. If they did, it was a challenge, a provocation. But then she saw the soldier laughing. And suddenly, she realized, this wasn't aggression. This was camaraderie. She hesitated, then, slowly, picked up a piece of his food and stole it back. The soldier blinked in surprise, then laughed. And just like that, she was one step closer to understanding humanity. A new name. A few days later, Elias found her alone, standing near the ship's observation deck. "You've been quiet," he said. Zara glanced at him. "Just thinking." Elias nodded. "About what?" She hesitated, then exhaled. "I don't know if I can keep my name," she admitted. Zara was a Velari soldier, a Velari slave. Elias was quiet for a moment. Then he smirked. "Then pick a new one." Zara stared at him. "Just like that?" "Yeah," Elias said. "You're not Velari anymore. You don't have to carry their name. You're you now." A long silence. Zara looked out at the stars, letting the weight of his words settle. A new name, a new identity, a new future. For the first time, she smiled. Maybe being human wasn't so bad after all.